Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 30th season, I interview poets about their craft, what they're accomplishing, what they're planning, what successes they've had in the past. It's a broader net than just poetry, however. We have on other brands of artists, sometimes novelists, sometimes short story writers, sometimes journalists. In addition, we have other kinds of varieties of artists, sculptors, musicians, actors. It's a very broad net that extends way past poetry. So if you have an idea for a guest who might be good for the Writer's Block, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be glad to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming out of Studio 1623 is a result of cable access television. You don't get this valuable public service if you subscribe to Dish. So you stay away from those other means of access to the television world. Stick with cable and the Writer's Block and all of our other Cape Ann products. I'm very happy today to say this evening that we do have a writer. She is a journalist by the name of Naomi Schalit. We're going to talk about her background and also because it's such a general, important topic today, journalism in general and its future. Naomi Schalit is originally from Southampton, Long Island, where she lived for a while, but mostly grew up in New York City and Connecticut. She went to undergraduate college at Princeton, where she where she majored in this restful topic, religion and Near Eastern politics. She was also, while at Princeton, an editor at the Nassau Literary Review. She went west after Princeton, after a couple of years, to get an advanced degree at Berkeley in California. And she stayed in California for a few years, writing, among other things, for Mother Jones. She couldn't stay away from the East Coast, however. She told me before the show she got homesick for the East, so she moved back east to Maine, a little different than Jersey and New York, and lived in Maine from 1994 to 2017, when she and her husband, John Christie, moved to Gloucester. And they now live in Gloucester, and she is still involved in journalism in Gloucester and in Boston. Naomi, thanks for being on the Writer's Block.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming down. I don't know where to start because journalism, as I just mentioned, is an important topic today, and it's getting more and more important. I want to ask you what you think the fate of journalism is in the age of alleged fake news.
Oh, goodness.
Thanks.
How's
that?
A big enough question, John. Well, let's just establish something, which is democracy needs journalism. The citizens need to know what their government is doing. At its most basic level, that's what journalism does. It can also give you recipes for what you're going to cook for dinner tonight. It can tell you about places that you might want to travel, but its fundamental role since America was a country has been to feed democracy, to provide citizens with information about what's going on in their government so they can hold government accountable.
Well, that's the Washington Post motto, democracy dies in darkness.
Yeah, it's a bit of a grim motto, but it's pointing out a real problem now, which is sometime in the late 20th century, the highly lucrative business of journalism started to falter. And you're talking about 20% profit margins, even more at many papers, especially when a lot of those papers, newspapers I'm talking about, but also TV stations, but largely newspapers, had monopolies, exemptions from, in fact, antitrust regulations. And so they could basically print money. They were the major place that a community's advertisers wanted to be found. And they also, the majority of their money came from advertisers. Some of their money came from subscriptions as well. With the internet, with the recession in the 80s, that model started to falter, and it's almost failed by now. And what we're seeing across the country is communities are losing both their daily and weekly, and in some cases daily newspapers. One just failed, I think it was either in Ohio or Pennsylvania, and leaving a community of hundreds of thousands of people without someone to report on their local government and schools and public health and you name it. So my husband, John Christie, and I were part of a move about 12, 14 years ago to start up nonprofit journalism services to at least do the kind of in-depth reporting, investigative reporting about government that was no longer being done because the money just wasn't there to pay a reporter to go off for 3 months or 6 months or a year and not produce a story during that time. And with diminished staff, you just couldn't afford to do that. So we did this in Maine. We had a statewide organization.
What was your organization?
This was called the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. It had a website called pinetreewatch.org. I think it may have changed now. It might be, I think it's still pinetreewatch.org. In any event, what we did was we specialized in looking at not what government was doing well, but what government was doing wrong. And we got a few people unelected. We found a fair amount of corruption. We found laws that were accomplishing the opposite of what they were intended to do. We found systems like the bail system that were grossly unfair and were also not working well. In one case, a man who was let out on bail on a domestic violence charge went out and killed his wife and kids. So we looked at what wasn't working. We wrote about it without fear, and sometimes things changed.
That's a good segue, because I have here a pamphlet, a book really, that you wrote titled Single Parents in Poverty, The Crisis No One Will Name. I'm going to hold this up. This is a very well-written, well-researched profile of some of the decision makers and some of the single mothers and some of the single negligent fathers in Maine, interviewed and often photographed by Naomi Schalit. And I don't know if this is available, but it's a very good example of the kind of research that that organization did and that you wrote about. Is this available?
It's certainly available online. And
what was their website again?
If somebody, the easier way to find it is to Google Single Parents in Poverty and add my last name, Schalit, and it'll come up. It was on our website, but it was also run. We shared our stories for free with any legitimate news organization in the state.
Punch in this title and your name,
Yep.
Naomi Schalit, which the audience has seen on and off on our screen. And they'll bring it up.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. This is the kind of research and the kind of journalism that defends democracy, protects democracy, because it's accurate and vetted and carefully done. Thank you for sharing that. I want to get back to Maine because it's on, it's in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
But I want to ask.
It used to belong to Massachusetts, actually.
What?
It used to belong to Massachusetts,
it's true,
right?
It's true. Tell us something, I want to go back a little bit. Tell us something about what you did when you wrote for Mother Jones.
Well,
can you think of a couple major stories that were successes for the magazine and for you?
Yeah, I can't, because what I did for Mother Jones was I wrote for them, but I didn't write stories for them. I wrote letters to rich people to ask them for money to help Mother Jones.
Oh, you were fundraising only?
I was, yeah.
Oh, you mentioned that before the show. I didn't know that that was all.
So that's what I did.
I shouldn't say all you did.
Yeah, no, that's all I did, but it was essential.
Money is the fuel.
And Mother Jones was an early version of nonprofit journalism. They had a nonprofit designation largely at that time in the 80s because it got you lower postal rates. Eventually, it grew into the idea that most nonprofit journalism outlets have now, which is they are performing a public service, and so they deserve that nonprofit status.
So your organization was in Maine was not necessarily modeled on Mother Jones, but
No.
parallel source of income and structure.
Yeah, foundations and people who supported us. And the part that was public service was not just providing these stories to the public, it was that we provided them to papers and radio stations and TV stations, whatever legitimate news organizations in Maine that wanted to run them.
So you're a multi-talented person with many hats. You were an English, no, you were not an English. You were a religion and history or political science major as an undergrad, but you wrote and edited for a literary journal. So, and somewhere you learned something about fundraising. Did you take a minor in fundraising?
Well, I did. When I first moved out to California, I've always had this interest in politics as well as writing. And so I worked for some political campaigns, and a very large part of political campaigns is asking for money.
Yeah.
So I started there. Then I also, while I was starting to move over into journalism, worked with the ACLU in San Francisco. I was on the board of the San Francisco chapter, also did fundraising there. Then in various aspects of my career, I would volunteer and help people write grant proposals for their nonprofits. And I was always helping friends do that. And so by the time we got to founding the organization in Maine, John and I each had about 8 different roles. I even learned to wrangle code and HTML in order to make the website work. And we both had to do fundraising. And, it's basically a simple thing, which is you make a good case for why you need the support, and then you ask people to give it to you.
So that's what you did for Mother Jones, and you brought that skill to Maine. Repeat the name of the organization. You and your husband, John Christie, were among the founders of.
Yes, it was the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, and that's still its formal name, and it's a mouthful. And if we had it to do over again, we wouldn't have given it such a long name.
The Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting,
which describes what it is.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So it was exhausting. We did it for 8 years. We were everything from chief cook to bottle washer, it's the kind of thing when you found an organization and you do such edgy reporting as we did, which was really taking the powerful in Maine to task. It wakes you up in the night. We had people leave our board because they got so mad at us because we wrote about their friends in not flattering ways, but all of them factual and confirmed. We took a lot of heat. We had people come after us and call up newspapers and say, that's just wrong. And the newspapers would say, wait a moment, and they'd come back to us and we'd give them all the facts. And so they'd keep it up on their sites and in their papers. So it was a lot of pressure. It was the kind of reporting that Maine wasn't really used to, but it was also a hell of a lot of fun.
I would imagine because so much of Maine is rural, Maine is a rural state, essentially, that one would not be used to that kind of thing that goes on in the big cities, because there has traditionally been some very good journalism in big newspapers. Yeah,
Maine had newspapers that were, touching my microphone. Maine had some urban newspapers, but there wasn't the tradition really in Maine of hard-nosed kind of reporting that, as you say, the big urban papers would do. And there was a kind of coziness, I think, between the State House Press Corps and those who were in the State House.
I've never heard of that kind of thing before.
Yeah, they liked them. They wouldn't bite the hand that fed them, because quite often those hands did feed them. Yeah. And, one of the things that John said to me when he actually hired me to be an opinion page editor quite a few years before that at the 2 newspapers he was publisher of was, he said, we have no friends. That's what you just have to understand. We have no friends, because if you think you have friends, then you will pull your punches. And you can't do that as a journalist. You just have to be fearless.
If you're a good journalist, unlike the wave of so-called fake journalism that's going on now, which is completely dependent on friendship and expresses nothing else but the friendships.
Yeah.
It's becoming, in many instances, at least on the hot media, television, nothing but that.
Well, I think there's partisan journalism on both sides. So you've got Fox TV, you've also got MSNBC. And I think what I would, and neither of those things is a good thing, because they're not really telling you what you should know, they're telling you what you want to know.
Well, I think they both have identical goals, and the identical goal is to sell ad time. So they're breathlessly, 98% of the time, breathlessly telling you about breaking gossip.
Yeah.
And
that would include CNN as well.
oh yeah, all the political.
Yeah, I think the last time I was watching convention coverage, it said breaking news, convention starts. Well, that's not breaking news. You've known for the last 6 months where the convention was going to be and at what time it would be on television. I think that people are used to the sort of adrenaline surge of that phrase, breaking news. But, there's an old phrase in journalism: if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. And I think viewers, you can blame all these partisan hucksters masquerading as news, but you also need to blame yourself, because the truth is they're successful because people watch them. So
keep people angry and afraid.
Yeah, or keep people feeling good about the thing that they believe, and those people are stupid.
I saw not too long ago in a movie a background image that was making fun for about a split second of news, and an announcer was saying, "Otters get wet."
Imagine that.
It's a perfect kind of
sky is
summary,
blue at some
line,
point,
yeah,
right?
Summary line of what much of that programming presents.
But you asked, what's going to happen to journalism? I don't know. At this point, I think we're in a very perilous place, both in journalism and in democracy, which is fed by journalism. I think there are literally studies that have shown that when a local newspaper goes under and you do not have coverage, that people become more partisan. So the people who used to maybe split their ticket when they were voting, they have now found that those people will just vote more party line because they just don't know enough, because they haven't heard about it in the newspaper.
Well, they're getting information from hot media, which is much less nuanced.
Or they're not getting the information at all.
And also they don't have the slow ability to decide what to read and to think about.
Right.
Yeah. Tell me a couple of, now we showed one title that you were involved with in Maine, Single Parents in Poverty. Tell me a couple of other projects that you were involved in there. And then I want to get to what you're doing now in Boston. But a couple other projects that you can mention from Maine. They're examples of that kind of public interest journalism.
So before I was at the center, before we started it, I worked, as I mentioned, for the papers that John published, the Kennebec Journal and the Morning Sentinel, Kennebec Journal in Augusta, Morning Sentinel in Waterville. They were both owned by the Seattle Times Company, a very fine paper and a very good family. Seattle Times. Same ownership as the Portland Press Herald down in Portland. And we did a series, I did a series. I got called one day by a legislator whom I knew, because I'd been a State House reporter for a long time for public radio and other sources. In any event, I got a call from this legislator. He said, "I want you to come to my district. I'm seeing something really strange going on right now." And what he was seeing was that food pantries in his very rural district in western Maine, over near Rangeley, were running out of food. This had not happened to them in anybody's memory. And so I went out on one winter day to spend the day with him in his truck, going from food pantry to food pantry. Practically, it was a snowy, icy day. I still remember being terrified because he was such a crazy driver that we were going to go off the road and I would end my life in a very noble way trying to find a story, but I'd still die too young. Anyway, that was the beginning of about a 6-month project where I found, both through talking to food pantries and to people who work with the poor and to schools where they were seeing kids come in without food.
Did that lead to this part? This is
No, it's a different
This
one.
is not a pantry,
No.
but it is a food.
Yeah, that is actually a food
soup
pantry too. It's
kitchen.
a soup kitchen. In any event, I found through analyzing Department of Agriculture data that Maine had the fastest growing rate of hunger in the nation. We were losing the industrial jobs at the paper mills, the shoe mills.
Say that again. Maine had
The fastest growing rate of hunger in the nation.
and this is in the
This
90s?
was 2007.
So a little over 10 years ago.
Yeah, 12 years ago. And it was showing up in these various places in the food pantries, in the churches where people were going after services to the minister and saying, can you help me out? In schools where children were putting their heads down on the desks and falling asleep because they hadn't had breakfast. In kids who were trying to get school lunch but their parents couldn't pay for it. In senior homes where people came in who seemed to have Alzheimer's or dementia of some sort, but it turned out that they were eating almost all of their food out of cans. They were canned goods because they were cheap. And there's a certain kind of, there's a metal that you can get too much of in your brain that causes those symptoms. Once they were fed fresh vegetables, fresh meat, fresh food, their symptoms abated. Can you imagine that?
So that project,
Yeah.
that writing had some effect
Yeah, it
on
did.
getting food pantries stuffed or maybe expanding the number of food pantries.
Well, we actually always like to look at what are the policy solutions to a problem like this. And what we determined and what we wrote about in the series, in the paper, so this was a 7-day series, was the single thing that could diminish the rate of hunger in the state better than any other thing that you could do was to make free and reduced lunch available to all kids and free and reduced breakfast also available to all kids. Right now, at that point, it was given to a limited number of families who were under certain guidelines, financial guidelines, able to get it. But a lot more families needed it.
I'll bet.
A lot of families needed it. They weren't getting it. So that ended up with the governor establishing a task force and looking at the issue.
Which governor was that?
This was Governor Baldacci. So it was 2 governors ago, prior to LePage. And it didn't happen that year. And in fact, there had been any number of attempts to expand those school lunch and school breakfast programs that had never happened, but eventually they did a few years down the line. And there was just more awareness means that more kids are
So
going
you
to get
put that
fed
on the
especially.
agenda.
Yeah.
Not only to have something to do done now, but in people's consciousness that hunger is a problem.
That's right.
Even in the great state of Maine.
Yeah, especially in the great state of Maine.
We are showing underneath your name on the screen theconversation.com, which is a website for the organization that you work for now in Boston. And I want to make sure we're getting close to the end of the half hour, that you describe what you do for that company.
Okay, so I used to be a writer and reporter, and now I'm an editor, which means I'm kind of a ghost writer. So our website, it's another nonprofit website, news service, that in fact does the same thing we did at Maine, but on a much larger scale, which is we share our content, our stories, with any legitimate news site that wants to publish them. They just have to say it's from The Conversation and use the same headline and not change the story. But the people who write our stories, and I'm the politics editor, the people who write our stories are all academics. So you must have a university or college affiliation to write for us. And the idea is that scholars have access to lots of research, lots of facts. And in a world that's awash with fake news and way too much opinion, we can offer actual facts out of the academy. And my job is to work with these scholars, both to commission stories from them, but also then once they write the stories, they have to be in a way that a newspaper would like to run them, an online news site would like to run them. So I help Many of them are good writers, but many of them need help changing from academic language to really, you know what I mean, to popular language, like language that you'd read in a newspaper.
Never say something in 10 words when you can say it in 20.
Yeah, right. I didn't say it, you did.
So you aggregate as well as assign topics that at board meetings you decide are appropriate for that mission. Give me a couple of examples of stories that you have edited.
So just today I edited a piece by a psychologist, actually, about how political candidates don't use self-deprecating humor anymore, and how they used to. Ronald Reagan, you'll remember when he debated Mondale and was asked a question about his advanced age and whether he really was going to be up to being president, said, it's not a problem, and not only that, I will not make an issue of the youth and relative, I think it was lack of qualifications or something of my inexperience. That's what it was. Obama's used it, Clinton used it, Bernie doesn't use it, Elizabeth Warren doesn't use it. Hillary Clinton tried to use it but didn't do very well with it. Donald Trump doesn't use it at all.
No, he's too delicate. I think Biden does.
Biden may, yes, that's right. That's right. He's sort of an old school Paul. So that's one of the less serious pieces, but there's also a serious point to it, which is that the candidates, this is a psychologist, those who feel secure in themselves feel okay about being self-deprecating. The ones who are not secure and not self-confident don't.
Yeah. Now, you said that's maybe a lighter piece than you're used to, but I think very important that author could probably easily get a job as someone's assistant speechwriter or advisor to speechwriters with that kind of speech etiquette savvy. Mm-hmm. Give me one quick, we've got 1 minute to go.
Okay,
Give me one other example.
One more example. I actually handed this off to someone because I was on vacation, but this Trump public charge rule where they're saying you can't be an immigrant if it doesn't look like you're going to be able to support yourself, and this is going to keep a lot of immigrants out of the U.S. Guess what? That happened, that same rule was used to keep Jewish refugees from the Nazis out of America in the 40s.
They stopped the boat? So would stop
they would stop them from coming.
Ships?
They would stop them from coming, and many of them died as a result. So there's an historic context to that rule that's deadly.
I've seen descriptions. My background's Irish. I've seen descriptions of the Irish when we were coming over in hordes, and they're identical to the descriptions of later immigrants or African Americans or Native Americans. We're out of time.
Too bad.
I am sorry. I felt like we were just getting going. I want to thank you very much, Naomi Schalit, professional journalist and experienced journalist and fundraiser, for being with us on the Writer's Block.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
I want to thank you in television land as well. If you've learned something about journalism, the future of journalism, and a little bit about money raising from Naomi Schalit, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.